The Balkans, iGaming's next hotspot? Moderated by Oliver De Bono, Quantum Gaming.
Hi, good morning everyone. I just want to thank everyone for coming. We're just waiting on Francesco, but until he joins us, it's a fantastic opportunity for myself and Petar to discuss a little bit more about the regulations in the region. And I've been listening to the talks now for the last 20-30 minutes. I do believe that there's a very interesting market out here in the Balkans, Serbia especially. Just to give you a bit of background on myself, I'm a platform owner, but also an operator. I live out here in Serbia, so I know the market quite well. And I do think, there is a huge potential. We've actually set up offices in this region, not just in Serbia, but all around the Balkans, Bulgaria and Croatia also. So I'm quite familiar with what's happening out here. But what I want to do is, and I'm sure the people, here, they want to understand a little bit more on the regulation front. So just to give a bit of depth, Peter, you mentioned regulation. Now, I, as an operator who's actually quite interested in the Serbian and Balkan market, what can you tell me about the regulation? What can you tell me about the framework that's actually happening out here? I mean, you mentioned before that there are a lot of frameworks globally who are supporting the current monopolies, but there is a little bit of that sense here in Serbia. What can you tell me? Is it open towards the remote gaming market? Is that one of the targets for the Serbian regulator?
Well, I can't speak for the regulator itself whether they actually would like to have more foreign operators, but in terms of the law itself, I think it allows the opportunity for foreign brands to enter Serbian or regional markets. However, you have to, I think, at the same time look at the economic and business perspective of it. Serbian market, I think Serbian people are very much grown into these brands that we can see every day on the streets. So for somebody abroad to come, I think it's going to be a challenge, and it's not going to be that much of, I think, a regulatory challenge, although there is a challenge. Of course, there is bureaucratic matters that you have to solve, and we are not like, let's say, Malta is iGaming hub, so they basically did all the ecosystem for different areas of the industry. However, I think, as you said, there is big potential. The laws itself are to some extent, let's say, clear. Of course, there is some bit of interpretation here and there that needs to be taken, and legal experience is necessary in that matter. But I think overall, foreign brands would be accepted here, and I believe regulator would not mind foreign brands coming and establishing place here.
Fair, and I agree, but so we're talking about creating the next hotspot, and I think from my experience there are three parts of creating a hotspot. You've got the local operator market, whether those operators would target Serbia. You've got setting up satellite offices, and Francesco, you mentioned this earlier, and then you've got the let's call it the ecosystem in and around. Now, you mentioned Malta before, and obviously today Malta is still the largest regulator in the market. There are game providers out there that simply won't onboard an operator without that license. And I see potential now in the Balkans, especially the likes of Romania, which is challenging the remote gaming market, but no one is yet there. And I think one of the biggest issues, and you touched on this earlier, Francesco, is that we're talking about the Balkans. We're not talking about a singular state that is, challenging for its supremacy. You have countries within and outside of the EU. You've got a lot of standalone regions that are not going to consolidate regulation. But let's talk about it as a whole, the Balkans. I mean, from your experience, Francesco, you mentioned this before. I myself have also set up a lot of satellite offices over here. We have 40 people here in Belgrade. There are a lot of hurdles. It's not that straightforward. I think when it comes to talent, that is one of the biggest benefits of Serbia. But when it comes to bureaucracy, there is a long way to go, especially all in and around the Balkans. But what is your take? Let's talk about Serbia specifically right now. What is your take on setting up shop here as any operator, B2B or gaming satellite office?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a relevant experience in Serbia. I mean, we don't operate in Serbia, okay, as a Fortuna Entertainment Group. I mean, so my view is on the overall Balkans rather than on a specific region. I mean, if I have a specific view, might be in Romania and in Croatia where we do operate. What I see is that, again, the access to talent is very good. I mean, it's beyond the expectations, I would say. The opportunity of creating an hub in a specific country of this region are very high, I would say. We have a good example here in Serbia with Mozartbet, which from Belgrade operates in Serbia, in Romania, in Bosnia, in Croatia, etc. So it is already happening again. And if we look also at what is happening today in Entain, they just announced the acquisition of my biggest competitor, Supersport. From Croatia, they want to create a Central European hub. So I believe that the hotspot moment is now. It's up to the specific, let's say, government to make the most out of it. It's a huge opportunities in terms of investments. And again, what I see is that the focus should be now on, getting this Balkans country into a more modern setup, which is more comparable to Western European countries, in order to be even more attractive to international investors.
Yes, this is it. And as someone who has invested in this region, I would say there is a huge potential. I mean, if you were to break it down based on our experience, we found, for example, there are certain categories of satellite offices that work better in certain regions in the Balkans. And I think this is ultimately what people are here to learn. When it comes to Serbia, for example, my opinion, SEO, content, customer support, unbeatable. This is one of the best regions in the world we've been able to set up. It's cost effective, highly educated talent. That is one of the benefits. But, on the other side, the bureaucracy is not that easy to get around. So we are where we are, and you have a lot of these satellite positions in and around the Balkans. Developers, Ukraine obviously was one of the top spots. Unfortunately, given the current climate, many have, moved out. But Bulgaria is another location that's been very, very popular for development. Croatia, I think it's somewhere in between, especially for the local market. But the Balkans on a whole is so segregated. And this is what we see happening as a pattern, is there are certain countries that want to take that market. I think Serbia has the potential to do it above probably the majority of the others. Maybe the biggest competition is Bulgaria and Romania, especially Romania now with challenging remote gaming. So it really does come down to the needs of the company. But what I want to get around a little bit is, if you see that Romania, and Peter, I'm going to shift over to you now, if you see that Romania is challenging the remote gaming sector. Remote gaming, for example, if we take Malta as an example, is accounting for over 20% of the GDP. I mean, we're talking around 2 billion euros. So that is a huge economical input that could be, for example, here in Serbia. Now, obviously, I know it's a substantially larger economy, but how does regulation now focus on that remote gaming market? And again, I want to circle around to this, because as an operator, I would be very curious having my operation here. Can I get licensed, maybe not to tackle the local Serbian market, but as a remote gaming location?
Yeah, so there are, I think, first of all, we touched upon two approaches. So one would be to set up, as you said, satellite office that would serve from here to some other markets, which I think is very beneficial. And as Francesco said, there is a great potential in talent, in workforce. You mentioned some of the particular industries. So that is one approach. The other would be to actually enter these markets as an operator, to apply for a license, for which there are many, let's say, obstacles. You mentioned Romanian legislation. So Romania has licenses for many different areas of gambling industry, whereas Serbia, for example, does not have that. So in that sense, we have still a long way to go in regulating different areas of the industry, thus creating some level of certainty for maybe major players or even mid-level players to want to tap into this market even as a sort of a test or experiment. But on the other hand, if you are just looking into having a good workforce that would be less expensive than in Western European countries, and that would be equally as good, if not better, I would say, then of course Serbia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, I think they are all a big potential in that sense.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the workforce, we know it's tried and tested. I think the irony here is that many operators have actually segregated. As I said, its development is in Bulgaria and Ukraine, and then SEO is a very, very big part of the Serbian culture. You have the two largest affiliates on the planet based here in Belgrade. But I think there's more to it, because if you look at the needs of companies, it's not just about, okay, I'm going to put my SEO team in Serbia, my development in Bulgaria, and by the way, Belarus, another fantastic region for development. We actually have our developers there. So we're quite segregated. But this means that as a company, I think it's also coming with the culture of remote working. But if you're an operator, the ideal scenario is you have your head office, let's say here in Belgrade, with your developers, with your support. It's easier to manage. But going down that road, what I'd like to understand, we've touched on the offices and the satellite offices, but Francesco, over to you. What about player base? Because if you're looking at the opportunity of penetrating a market, you also want to assess the value of players. You know, the big targets in the world have always been Germany, Netherlands, Canada, and Scandinavia. What is the player base? I'm not sure if that you're familiar with that, but what is the value of players here in the Balkan region? Because we know Ukraine is very popular now as a targeted market, obviously not with the current climate, but what about the rest of the Balkans? What would you say is the best value to attack as an operator?
The value of the player base, or the lifetime value of the Balkans player, this is an issue in my opinion. It's extremely good, too good to be true, too good compared to their income. Okay, I mean, this region has a huge problem of problematic gambling, as simple as this. People gamble too much, which is good for the business. That's why a lot of companies are interested, you know, in entering the Balkanic region. But from the other side, it could be a boomerang, and it will be a boomerang in the next 2-3 years, I'm afraid. So as I've said before, it's up to the operators to, let's say, self-regulate and present themselves to the stakeholders with proper tools and proper measures in order to make their business sustainable, okay? And this is not scattered, this is not fragmented among the Balkans regions, jurisdictions. It's the same a little bit everywhere. When I look at the lifetime value of a Croatian player, of a Bosniak player, of a Romanian player, it's extremely good. It's even comparable to some Western European countries, where we know that the GDP per capita here is not the same of a Western European country. So there is apparently, it's very apparent that we have a problem. And we need to have, we need to be brave enough, let's say, to tackle it before it's too late.
Okay.
Can I just jump in? I think Francesco touched upon a very important thing, and I mentioned it in the presentation, is that by allowing ourselves to basically do whatever we want to do, because at the same time some regulation that exists in Western European countries are not present here, we are basically inviting the regulator to put a clamp on the business. So self-regulation is, I think, a very necessary tool at this stage of development of the Balkan region in iGaming industry, before we have the situation like UK has now or some other countries have.
Agreed. Look, there are many regions in the world. I personally, from my experience, I believe they're over-regulated, and I believe there are regions that are under-regulated. But I think that all comes down to the concept, you know, could the Balkans be the next hotspot? And I think we can all speak from experience. Many operators are not going to self-regulate. It sounds really good, and we would love, you know, to have some kind of, let's say, minimum guideline, which is ultimately what the regulators do. But let's, you know, focus back to the Balkans right now. This is something I did want to touch on. So we're talking about player value, and we're talking about regulations. Now, the Balkans obviously stretches all the way to Greece, and the CIS regions all the way past Ukraine, Moldova, and so on. Many of these states which are now becoming iGaming hubs, it is becoming popular, they're not heavily regulated, and ultimately this is kind of the life cycle of the gaming industry. A little bit of regulation, operators move in, ancillary companies join the fray. They all move to Serbia, they all move to Romania, and then the government goes, wait, we have quite a big industry here, let's keep an eye on what's happening. But I want to go back to looking at this ecosystem, because where operators choose to move inside the Balkans is going to be based on one of those pillars. Ultimately, the workforce they can develop, or how good the player base is. So here, from my experience, I want to speak to you about this, Petar. I've seen not a lot of regulation on the player side. It's all new, it's all coming forward. But who are the bodies responsible, I don't know, let's say within the regulator here? Player complaints, AML, gambling addiction. What levels are already in place here in Serbia to tackle these known factors? Because it is a very large gambling community.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, so we have a couple of, let's say, regulators that are focusing on several different things. Of course, we have the Office of Games of Chance that is basically giving the licenses, but there was also National Bank that is in charge of the financial institutions. However, in terms of like gambling addiction and you know, basically treating possible consequences of problem gambling, I think we have still a long way to go. There are some institutions, but they are, I think, to most of the gamblers unknown. So in that sense, there is not like Be Gamble Aware organization that's going to cover the region, and that is some potential to have that. I think a lot of the operators here are trying to do some things, you know, inviting players to play responsibly, but at the same time, if you have advertising that will basically say, oh, you can win whatever you want, and then says a little bit play responsibly, that's, you know, it's not giving a full effect of it. So in that sense, there is, in that part, there are still ways to go in this region completely, but, you know, as you said, self-regulation is very hard. At one point, we will come to the situation where the gambling regulator would say, okay, let's set up something similar to what, I don't know, Malta has or UK has or some other country have. I'm just hoping that we will not go too deep into regulation, that the business can still thrive, because I'm more for, you know, certain regulation that will allow the business to thrive, then into a full clampdown mode, and then make maybe Balkans as only satellite office hub. I think gaming has potential, you know, on economy side and player side, Francesco has more experience, but in terms of regulations, we have, I think, a basic system set up, but there are still a long way to go to actually support the whole industry and allow it to come here and work from here and make this a new baby of the iGaming industry.
Agreed, and as you said, but I think, you know, we're going to circle back round. Ultimately, right now, for foreign operators, it is a hotspot to set up your team, to your SEO, your content, and we're seeing this pattern here. But I want to jump onto something, because we don't have that much time left, but I would love to touch a little bit on one of the interesting things which operators and gaming companies love, tax incentives. So we're not going to consolidate tax incentives across the Balkans, but I'm curious what it stands as an operator here. What is gaming tax like here in Serbia?
So I think the biggest incentives are actually for setting up an IT related office here. Even not naming it iGaming or something like that. For that, we have incentives, I think, for workforce and also for the companies itself. I'm not a tax lawyer itself, so I can't call upon, you know, different tax incentives in particular. But in any case, for setting up, let's say, something related to IT, of course, iGaming being one of that, you could have nice incentives here in Serbia specific. For gambling tax incentives, I'm not sure that we have some, to be honest, but maybe further down the line, I think that could be a campaign for the government, actually, and operators could definitely come and approach the government to maybe devise a plan, because I think the government itself is very open to having foreign investors, regardless of their nationality. And I think that is a way to open up the business here. But at the same time, the market already has 17 online licenses. So we're not that big of a country, so you have to think of how many more licenses can be issued, and that the market still has enough pies for everybody. You know, at some point there would have to be some M&As done to maybe narrow it a little bit, and that everybody has a piece of the pie.
No, I agree, and you know this is happening globally. I don't know if anyone's aware, but you always have this sense of we're open policy. You know, countries open up the regulation, many people come in, and then they stagger it. At this point in time, I would say it's very, very difficult for an operator to come in and penetrate the Serbian market. There are brands that have been established for many, many years, and it's the same in Bulgaria and Romania. But Francesco, over to you. Are you familiar with any of the other incentives in and around the Balkans?
No, I'm not. I mean, I don't have any knowledge about particular incentives to gambling companies in the Balkans, apart from what can be incentivized at a global level, let's say. So no.
Fair enough. But so this comes circling back around to what's going to make, you know, the Balkans the next hub or hotspot. You know, I think pretty much everybody in this room knows when you're looking at the likes of Malta and Gibraltar and now Cyprus launching remote gaming, you know, ultimately it's coming down to that flat 5%, which is a huge appeal for operators. And I think, you know, places like the Balkans, in my opinion, the next 5 years will remain satellite office locations. It's going to take time to build those remote gaming regions apart from Romania, as I think Romania has already shown their interest in taking that market, offering a low tax rate, very, very similar to what Malta has done on gaming tax, and then coming back around to develop an ecosystem around it. You know, what Malta did differently at the time is they didn't say we want to create the hub for the individuals or the support offices. They said, okay, you know, here's your tax incentive. It's now worth you bringing 100, 200, 300 individuals to the island. We have an opposite effect over there now, where it's too congested and it's actually become overly expensive to acquire that talent. You know, so I think here in the Balkans you have a lot of talent. It's just the regulation and the tax incentive that's not matching it. But Francesco, I just want to hear a bit more about, you know, your experience in this region. What would you say are the best places to set up shop? You know, people are here to understand the value of gaming in the Balkans, and it seems very much it is about satellite offices and will become about remote gaming quite soon. But what's your take on that?
On the shops?
No, setting up offices in these regions?
Look, I mean, if we take Fortuna as an example, and we are a good example, we have moved all of, basically 2/3 of our R&D operations in Split. So we manage basically 2/3 of our R&D operations from our Split offices. All the casino is developed in Split, and a good part of online sportsbook, and 100% of retail, R&D retail is in Split. If you look at Croatia, talking about hotspots, in Croatia, Superbet, they have something like 300 or 400 developers. Tipico, the German company, all the trading department is in Croatia, in Osijek, and a lot of unsuspected lotteries operators in Montenegro, and in other satellite regions are operated by offices in Zagreb, as an example. So there are, I mean, I believe that few jurisdictions in the Balkans are already hotspots, okay? Both for R&D, for marketing, and for local operators, of course. You know, I believe that being part of the EU is very important, probably even more important than having fiscal, you know, incentives. Also because fiscal incentives are always temporary. You have them for a couple of years, then at the next round of the government, they're gone, okay? And they open up to a lot of speculation. So, reliability, stable political framework, and being part of the European Union are crucial for becoming an hotspot. And there are already jurisdictions in Balkan that are in that direction.
Well, Francesco, you mentioned one thing that I wanted to actually close this off, because we're quickly running out of time. You mentioned the EU, which ultimately is one of the key factors that, helped Malta become the gaming hub it is today. Because ultimately it is those, let's say, globalized regulations, those security levels for businesses that offer a level of protection. Don't get me wrong, I love it out here in Serbia, but there is a lot of differences to setting up operations here in Serbia than there is anywhere within the EU. We have consolidated regulation and employment law across 90% of the EU. Once you come outside of that, it's actually quite difficult for companies to adapt. And I've seen that from my own experience. So we've learned a lot out here. My advice to anybody, if you are coming into these regions, partner with local firms. That's really, really important. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. But I do want to take a minute, because we didn't do these in the last panels, just to ask the audience if there are any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists about setting up operations over here, regulation, talent, and so on. Is there any questions from the audience? Nope, we didn't get any interest. So thank you very much, guys. We appreciate your time, and have a great rest of the show.
Thank you.